All right, what is up, y'all? Welcome back in GC Live. Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark there, Clint Hammond somewhere in an office just passing out home loans, doing a great job there. Hit him up, 803-422-6797. He's our guy over at CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com for more information. NMLS number 71597. I have to say that part every time, but the important part for you is to call him today, 803-422-6797, if you're in the market to buy a home or if you're thinking about refinancing a home. Clint's your guy. Hopefully, GC Live is your spot and Gamecock Central is your spot for South Carolina transfer portal recruiting news. It's been a wild week so far, and it has been a week that will continue to potentially have some movement in the portal for South Carolina. Gamecocks, of course, last weekend, add 2 guys. Then you have a little stretch where you're kind of waiting to see what's going to materialize. And then South Carolina kind of again, and this comes in waves, Chris. They add 3 guys on Wednesday and 3 guys that were at positions we knew they were kind of targeting in the portal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pulse, taking the pulse, Wes, of the Gamecock fan base, most people understand, hey, there's a process to this, but it seems like, hey, we want more commitments. The people want commitments. And so the Gamecocks have added some, right? There will be more visits throughout this week, more visits throughout this weekend, as Shane Beamer talked about during his press conference this week. But people wanted to see, some of the fruits of the labor. And this class starting to come together for the Gamecocks, as you just said. And we talk about priority positions, Wes. There's a lot of them on this team. I mean, Beamer talked about this publicly again this week, how there's really not a position on the roster where we're not looking in the transfer portal. There are levels to it, right? You're not looking for, a lot of teams out there looking for a starting quarterback. You're not looking for that. You're looking for depth, a guy who could play a backup, whereas you're looking at, say, defensive tackle or linebacker or offensive line and running back, right? You're looking at some positions there where you're going, hey, we could go get a starter caliber player, or we need a higher volume of players. So you now start looking at this class, Wes, between the couple guys that they had already gotten, the 3 guys that they most recently got, this thing's starting to come together. And the 3 most recent additions, of course, came at defensive tackle, at tight end, at linebacker. So you're starting to check some of those boxes of spots being filled. I think, Wes, the most important thing to remember as we continue following this portal cycle, which again is not over in terms of guys that South Carolina could get, even in terms of guys that could enter the portal, the window's still open till the 28th. You've got bowl games, you got college football playoff. Those players will get an additional window. There's a window in the spring. This thing is not over. It is taking shape. It looks like the staff is taking the approach of, hey, yeah, we could fill spots early. It seems they're taking a patient, careful approach. That's not to say they've landed every single player that they wanted, but they've certainly landed some of their priority guys. And just from what we've seen, Wes, about their approach, they're not going to overcommit, over-leverage themselves just to fill up this class in the first couple weeks of this portal window.
Yeah, and, to an extent, Chris, that is kind of what our expectation was, that they were going to take a, aggressive but also kind of methodical approach to who they were going to target. And sometimes, there may be guys out there we think they're going to target, and they end up, for whatever reason, as they're gathering their information, they end up passing. And then there are other guys that kind of come a little bit out of nowhere that they end up targeting that, maybe we weren't highly anticipating them being involved with from the very beginning. And, here's the thing. Like I see people talking about, if they miss on a guy or if a guy goes somewhere else, like you're going to miss on guys in recruiting. Like that's just how it goes, especially in the portal era, when it happens very, very quickly. Then you kind of just have to accept that it's kind of much like the commitments are going to come in these waves. So are the misses, because you are taking what is usually a year or 2 year process and just boiling it down into a few weeks. So I think that is important to remember if you see a guy commit somewhere else. Also important to remember, much like high school recruiting, there's going to be kind of a board that we're not going to see. Like nobody else is going to see the full board in terms of the order. We may pick up some information from time to time, like, hey, this guy's at the top of the board, this guy's high on the board, etc. But sometimes there will be some misses that really is just the school or the coaches saying, hey, we're kind of going to go for somebody else here. Or let's be honest, like you said, not going to over leverage ourselves in terms of what you may, say a guy is capable of earning at a particular school. So I think for Carolina, off to kind of like you can kind of see them working their plan, Chris. And that's not going to be all high profile guys. Sometimes it's going to be guys that fit and fill needs. And let's start to talk about a few guys in particular, because we're not going to have a super long show today. So I want to go ahead and dive into it. Jordan Dingle, someone, Chris, I went back and looked in my DMs. I was interviewing this kid, and not a kid anymore, but I was interviewing him in like 2019 when he was visiting South Carolina. And he was telling me at the time how most of his family lived in Manning, South Carolina. And so even though he went to Kentucky, his brother Justice went to Kentucky, even though Bowling Green, Kentucky is listed as his official hometown. If you look at like his Kentucky bio, strong South Carolina ties for this family. And Dingle is someone who took a very just kind of quiet approach to the portal process. We heard, hey, he's on campus. Then we hear, hey, South Carolina's in a great position to land a commitment. And then boom, word breaks yesterday that he's signed with South Carolina. And that was that. But a bit of a homecoming here for Jordan Dingle.
Yeah, the family ties and a guy that we've been familiar with that family for quite a while, like you just laid out, Wes. This is a very interesting, I think, take for South Carolina. And I think a really good, we talk about fit a lot in the portal. The window is very condensed, even if you have over a month. A lot of times in the portal, you're dealing with guys where you don't have as much background information. You're scrambling. And that's not just South Carolina, right? That's everybody. Taking the right guys is very important. It's not just talent. It's not just, it's 2024, Wes, we got to talk about it. NIL, the price tag, the budget, those things weigh in. South Carolina, I've said this several times, really struck gold in the last transfer portal recruiting class, not only because of the talent they got, but the types of guys that they got. We've talked about this a lot. I really feel like Dingle is one of those really good fits. And there's a bonus here in that Dingle didn't come from, just a cool random school, Michigan. Like, he's not a kid that you're unfamiliar with. You know about Dingle. You've played against him, so you've scouted him. You've seen him in the recruiting process. So you have a little bit more background than you would have on some of these transfer portal prospects, where you're going off of, what you've heard from sources. If you're in the recruiting office, in the staff, going off their film, you have a little bit more context here. This is someone, from what I've heard, that, they feel like can be kind of a two-way threat, because you look back, particularly that 2022 year, you've pointed this out, Wes, when he had Will Levis throwing in passes, his most productive year as a receiving tight end, but also a guy that can be, I think, projects as a strong blocker. And when you look at what South Carolina has done offensively, they have featured the tight end in this offense. Now, you have Mike Shula coming in next year, but he said, hey, the aspects of the offense that have worked, we want to keep those. And so I think he'll add his own wrinkles, but certainly featuring the tight end with the personnel that they have on this team, Wes, Dingle's now part of that. I think that's a good idea. So very interesting take in that this is a guy with experience, SEC experience, some proven experience, that I think could, feature as a pass catcher, but also as a blocker and a special teams player for you also.
Yeah, and I think, man, they want to continue to be a kind of older veteran team. And you can look at the portal in 100 different ways. Some schools are going to go all out for just kind of those high profile difference makers. Some schools are going to just try to build their depth, replace guys they lose. Some schools are going to go a little bit kind of in the middle of those two philosophies. And we are seeing South Carolina. We've seen them land the high-profile guys. But for the most part, I think as much as they talked about depth all last offseason and all leading into this season, they want to kind of do everything they can to continue that. And, you look at that spot, man, 3 sort of co-starters, I would say, this year. We know Josh Simon was like the top guy in the room, but lots of snaps from Brady Hunt, lots of snaps from Michael Smith. So losing Josh Simon, I think you can kind of slide Jordan Dingle into that trio. May the best man win in terms of exactly how it plays out from there. But I'm with you, man. Watching that highlight from 2022, like there's some upside here to go. And he played in line, like kind of attached that tight end position that is your traditional tight end spot in what was a pro style offense. And appeared to excel, appears to be a guy that can get open against your linebackers in man coverage and can run a little bit, has some long arms, can go get the football. And I do think there's still some upside here to go that maybe wasn't quite tapped into at Kentucky. So we'll see change of scenery, which I think is going to be a big phrase for us when we talk about these portal guys. We'll see what that means for Dingle, who played a pretty good bit this year too, but the numbers the last 2 seasons have not quite been what they were when when he had a quarterback who could just spread the ball around and get him the football quite a bit. So let's move on and kind of go down this list here, Chris. And, when you look at Gabriel Brownlow-Dendy, 5-star high school guy, did not play a ton at Texas A&M, dealt with some injuries, was behind some other guys. And I don't want to serve this thing up, unfairly either and just say, well, that 100% means he's going to be an instant impact guy for South Carolina. Like, we can acknowledge he really was not playing much at Texas A&M while also acknowledging that this was a top 15 prospect in the country out of high school. He was a 5-star on 3 of the 4 services out of high school. He was an on-3 industry ranking, which is the weighted average 5-star, and was the number 2 prospect in all of Florida, which we know how much talent is in that state. And just for whatever reason, it hasn't quite clicked yet. South Carolina will be hoping with that change of scenery, with Travian Robertson as his coach, with a little bit more of an opportunity that he can step in and make an impact for a team that, as we know, is losing quite a bit of production from that defensive line group on the interior.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to end up wearing this one out, Wes. But it does remind me in some ways of the Monel Goodwin take portal acquisition from last year. You look at Goodwin, and I'm not even comparing them as a player, but just situationally, Monel Goodwin was a top 100 recruit, and Brownlow-Dendy was ranked even higher, right? National recruit, played for a program, was recruited by a program that always seems to recruit very well. Certainly, man, A&M has churned out some defensive line talent, as is Alabama. Monel Goodwin spent 3 seasons at Alabama and played in a total of 5 games, right? And then you look at what he did this year. Wes, he comes in and plays 154 snaps for the Gamecocks, played in every game, and will have much more of a role next year. And Monel Goodwin did that, Wes, not like you didn't look at it and go, he's playing out of necessity, right? His snaps went up some when DeAndre Jules went down with an injury. But that was a deep, talented, very experienced South Carolina front at defensive tackle. Goodwin was still able to come in and get some snaps. And remember when he got here in January, we immediately started hearing, hey, this kid really looks the part. We saw him in the spring game. He flashed there. He looked like a very good player. And I think, like I said, that role is going to increase. With Brownlow-Dendy, you can look back and maybe see some similarities. No, he hasn't played a big role yet. He hasn't lived up to that potential, but you kind of look and say, well, why is that? Injuries have played a role, as you said. Maybe the change of scenery. Football's still a developmental game, so not every 5-star highly recruited guy comes in and makes a Dylan Stewart impact in year 1. Some guys take a little longer to develop. And I think something you pointed out earlier, this guy played defensive end a lot in high school. So moving inside and playing in the SEC, there's a transition to that as well. So, Travian Robertson, you look at his track record, his development, NFL background, SEC background as a player and a coach. He's started to put together early in his coaching career a nice development resume. This will be the next. When I say project, I don't mean that in a negative sense. His next pupil, to bring in. And the good news, Wes, is you have a canvas to work with here. You have a really good kid by all accounts who certainly has the size and the talent. And he'll get every opportunity to come in and compete. There's no doubt about that.
Was that football as a developmental game a Will Muschamp throwback?
I mean, he did say that, but man, but at the same time, a lot of coaches say that, and it is true. When you sign a guy like a Dylan Stewart, or I'm sure in A&M when they signed Gabe Brownlow-Dendy, you look at 5-star. This guy's going to come in and start making plays immediately. Sometimes that happens. Fair to say, Dylan Stewart probably surpassed what anybody thought, and he actually had expectations this year. But sometimes there are other circumstances. You're behind some guys. You're injured. Brownlow-Dendy went into his freshman season at A&M with an injury. He went into this season at A&M banged up, according to Mike Elko, their head coach. So getting healthy is going to be the first part of this, right? Look at Rocket Sanders. 2022 lit the SEC up. 2023 didn't have as good of a year. Why? He was injured, right? And you look at what he did this year at South Carolina, had a much better year because he was healthy for the most part. So you can kind of look back and see, you can figure out the why with Brownlow-Dendy, and you can look at the fact that he's got talent and size. I think this is another good fit with a guy that has a lot of talent out of the portal.
I think, man, like you mentioned earlier, playing defensive end in high school, that's going to be a jump to playing defensive tackle in the SEC. And, and I don't know how much of each he played. I just know when I flipped on the film, kind of going through the most recent high school film I could find of him going back, a lot of it was him playing defensive end. And so if, you're already, and he was a big defensive end for high school, like you're already the most physically dominant player on that defensive line. And now you're having to go against tackles who are typically going to be a little bit more agile, but not as strong, not as big. And so you're sitting there just physically dominating people in high school. And now you go into college in the SEC and they're like, we're going to move you inside. We're going to take away some of that space you get to use if you're playing on the edge. And we're going to put you up against the strongest players that the offense has to offer. And that's going to be a completely different battle for a guy on the defensive line, no matter how physically gifted and talented you are. That's when learning those techniques, learning how to use your hands, learning how to separate from being blocked, and then letting, some of those other things, some of those God-given, just being light on your feet, being quick, being athletic, that's when that stuff can take over. So I think someone that will be one of those players, Chris, we are monitoring heavily when he gets to Columbia. Like, what's the word on this guy? Do we quickly hear, oh, he's made an impression? Do we quickly not hear that? What are the early returns? I think will be fascinating and frankly kind of important for Carolina when you look at what they lose from that defensive line room. So we'll certainly see where that goes. Let's move it forward though. Andrew Jones. I would say, Chris, right there with Josiah Trotter of the two early names we heard at linebacker. And, in terms of we're keeping an eye on these guys. They seem to be two that Carolina has their sights on. Trotter goes to Missouri. Gamecocks get their guy in Andrew Jones. And, I don't know if you can even properly convey how important this one was when you look at just sort of the need there. In my opinion, maybe their biggest pickup to this point, just in terms of getting someone with productivity who is at that major position of need for Carolina at linebacker.
A theme, Wes, and Beamer talked about this week, getting older or staying old and experienced. There will be some players potentially in the portal that South Carolina gets that are players that don't have as much experience, right? Like a Vandrevius Jacobs last portal cycle, you bring him in, he's almost like getting a freshman or sophomore, right? Had played a little bit at Florida State, and then you get him and he has multiple years left. Other guys are 1 year guys like a Kyle Kennard, like a Demetrius Knight, a Rocket Sanders. South Carolina is taking guys in this portal cycle that, some of them have been super productive. Some of them have been around the game like Brownlow Dindy for a while, but maybe have not quite reached that potential. With Andrew Jones, this is a guy that's played multiple years of college football, but seems to be kind of blossoming and coming into his own. Look at the past season he had, his best year by far. But you also feel like, all right, there's more here. This guy is not tapped out because he's going to step up to the SEC level with the resources that South Carolina has. No slide on Grambling State and their development, right? They've done a good job with them, but he's going to be going into an SEC nutrition program, an SEC strength and conditioning program. Look at the guys that we just mentioned, Wes, particularly Knight and Kennard. They came to South Carolina and elevated themselves, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. But I think coming to Carolina helped them with that. With Jones, this is a good-looking kid physically who has a lot of tools. You feel like he can probably get bigger, stronger, faster going into next season, and then it's going to have a chance to continue growing his game as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think you look at that spot, man. Debo, D-Knight, Van Mark Scott, all seniors, and those are primarily, once Kamara left, that was your three guys, and J.R. Johnson was in there a little bit. He was playing some special teams, but really, those are the three guys that were the main part of your rotation. So you got to replace all that production. You got to replace a lot of athleticism, a lot of experience that was there, and this just goes to show you, prior to the portal, you'd be saying, hey, all these high school guys have got to come in and play. Is there a JUCO kid we can bring in? And now you're able to go out and get someone who, Chris, appears to be obviously productive, but tough-nosed, runs to the football. Now, I've not seen, what does he run on the GPS? What's his 40, all those things. Can't really speak to that. I just know on film, he appears to get to the football in a hurry and appears to have some instincts about him, appears to have some just physical toughness about him with the way he delivers hits, knocks guys backwards. And frankly, I think one of the first thing Gamecock fans loved about him was he just looks like a grown man. So I think once again, Carolina kind of leaning into let's not count on 17 and 18-year-olds to come in and fill every need. Let's go out and get some adults for some of these spots.
Yeah, it was so funny, Wes, because this was almost one of those ones like Spencer Rattler or Rocket Sanders where Gamecock fans are trying to make it happen, like speak it into existence, because it comes out that Andrew Jones hits the portal, on threes, putting out graphics and stuff. And people are like, look at that dude. Like he looks like a grown man. He looks like Demetrius Knight. He looks like a grown man. And then, but lo and behold, it actually makes sense for South Carolina to recruit him because he's a talented guy, right? So kind of fits that mold of what you're looking for. Again, Wes, it's going to be hard to replace D-Knight. Just from, we could do an entire show probably talking about why. But the reality is you do have to replace him and a couple others. From a trait standpoint, a production standpoint, he checks a lot of those boxes, and I think he's got more room to continue growing to reach his potential as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Andrew Brown pointing out he squats 675 pounds. I saw that video. Yeah, just a physical specimen that is going to be counted on, frankly. I think if the season started today and you're talking about the roster they're going to have for 2025, you'd be counting on Fred J.R. Johnson, and you'd be counting on Andrew Jones being your starting linebackers at this point, frankly. So we'll see. There was a question earlier. What will Carolina, will Carolina continue to recruit guys out of the portal? And, I tend to think, yes, there's some stuff floating around. I've seen people ask, Are they just going to take one? I suppose that's still possible, but I've kind of heard, I think you've kind of heard, Chris, from the very beginning, 2 was going to be the ideal number of guys to bring in. And now they're not going to reach. Like, they're not going to take linebackers just to take them. That's been a theme as well. I don't think they're going to reach at any position or what they would see in their evaluations as they reach. Are you going to miss on an eval from time to time? Yes. Any school, any coach will miss from time to time, but I don't think they're going to reach. To your point earlier, the portal is not closed. And then you also have that 5-day window after a bowl game for a particular, really for the 2 teams after that, where those guys can enter as well. So we still don't know who all is going to be in the portal and available. Again, early on, it was Trotter and Jones. Like, those were the 2 names that it was just verifiable. These are high priority targets for South Carolina, and that proved to be the case. And you know what? Missouri got one of them. South Carolina gets the other. And now I think you kind of reassess. We've been asked quite a bit. We were asked earlier about Taekwon King, who played his high school ball at Dillon. This could change. Could we be missing something? Always possible. But from everything I've gathered, I literally just texted somebody while we were on the show, Chris, who would know, and does not appear to be much movement with South Carolina and Taekwon King. So that's just an example of they're going to do their own evaluations, right? Like, they're going to do their own evals, and they're going to trust what they see and what they think can change. Can things change quickly in the portal kind of window? Of course. But as of right now, I just haven't heard of much happening right there with Carolina.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you make about not reaching. Would the staff ideally like to? Yes. But at that point, that's when, Trotter's on the board, and you're balancing some other guys, juggling some other guys, maybe for that second spot if you can get Trotter. Well, Trotter's going to go play for Missouri. So what does that mean now? It means maybe you wait. Portal window's still open till, it's open for another week, Wes, in general. And then after the college football playoff, after bowl games, it's going to be open for 5 days after each of those games happen for each of those kids too. And you got the spring window. And South Carolina looked in the spring window in the portal last year too. Like, they needed another receiver. And they went and got Delvon Campbell in the spring window. So maybe that could happen for linebacker as well. Maybe they find one this cycle that ends up making all the sense in the world. But they are going to rush. They're not – South Carolina is not looking to use the transfer portal to fill roster spots so they can say that they filled a roster spot. They're not looking to – hey, this guy's a 4-star. He was a 4-star in high school or on 3 in their transfer portal rankings. Not that there's anything wrong with those, of course. Guys do a great job. But they're not scrolling up and down those saying, how many of these guys can we add? Because you don't play the games on paper, So we'll see where it shakes out. I think there are plenty of positions where there's flexibility, Wes. Like, would South Carolina take a defensive back, a corner, if they could get a really, really good one? Yeah, probably. But if there's not one, maybe you stand pat there. Maybe you wait till the spring. You keep assessing the portal as it comes. So a lot of fluidity in a very short, condensed amount of time, but there is still some time left even in this particular window.
Yeah, and when you've got Miles Norwood coming in today, actually, one to keep an eye on, Ball State corner. That one felt kind of early on like South Carolina was in maybe a good position. That one's gotten a little bit more of a battle from what I've seen and heard on that. Kentucky highly involved, Louisville highly involved, South Carolina highly involved. That visit, probably going to post an update on Gamecock Central when we get off here, but that visit set to begin this evening for South Carolina at about 7:00. So we'll keep an eye on that. And it should be a busy week, guys, and we'll just see where it takes us. Beamer confirming, and we've been kind of trying to track who's coming in, when, where, why throughout. And so Beamer yesterday said, look, two guys just left. And he's like, 2 guys are in tomorrow. 5 guys are in this weekend. And so you can kind of, Chris, go back and align the different players with when they were expected in. Beamer obviously wasn't going to call them by name, but you look at the Michigan center and Andrew Jones, who were both in and kind of finishing up their visits yesterday. You look at 2 guys that maybe would reflect Miles Norwood and Justice Haynes today. And then there are a couple of guys that are already sort of expected or were potential visitors for this weekend, but not 5 names out there that were completely confirmed yet. So that will be something that we'll be tracking and keeping an eye on going into this weekend as South Carolina looks to sort of close out this wave, because you've got a dead period after this weekend, which I think is important to note. You're going to have a lot of players, a lot of prospects who cram in these visits and then make a decision, I would think, at the end of this weekend. And then I think there will maybe be a reset sort of among the entire kind of transfer portal movements, if you will.
Yep, got the dead period coming up soon, where things will slow down some, and then you'll have some extra time again after bowl season, after college football playoff, and then the spring window. So there is more activity to come with South Carolina having visitors on campus the remainder of this week and weekend. And you're right, Wes. I mean, a lot of times from what I hear from either transfers or just from people who know things about the transfer process, is a kid is going to cram in those visits, like you said, and then you got a pretty quick turnaround time. It's not, let's go visit these schools and I'm going to take a few weeks to decide. They're working on a tight window. Coaches are working on a tight window. A lot of times, Wes, these guys are going on these campus visits, and you're talking playing time, opportunity, NIL. You look at some of the other stuff, but it's much more condensed into the kind of business / development side of things. Coaches want to know because they're trying to build their roster, figure out their next move if you're not coming. So there's a lot of pressure put on these guys to decide quickly. So tough decision for a lot of them. A lot of them have great options, and they're deciding between great options, not over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 years, but maybe 2 or 3 or 4 days. So we'll have some more answers, I think, by, heck, it could be right after we hang up this show. It could be, in the next few days, or a combo of all that.
Yeah. And let's be honest, Chris, when you're talking about lots of NIL asks from guys, I should say, I mean, if a guy's going to get offered a certain amount of money, then you can certainly see people saying, well, hey, I need a decision from you. Like if it's going to be treated as a business, then I can see why both sides are going to treat it as a business. Like, hey, we'd love to have you, but also we may have to move on if we're not getting the answer we need, because every school is trying to fill very particular, very specific needs. So I would say only so many players, only a certain amount of players that have full leverage in that they're just good enough that they can kind of completely do it on their own timeline, I think. So anyway, we'll see how all that plays out. But like I said, a little bit shorter show today, so we're going to get out of here. Again, check out everything on GamecockCentral.com. Got a ton going on there. We're going to keep tracking it. And, of course, when guys commit, we'll have that background information on how they fit in and, of course, what type of talent they'll be bringing to Columbia, South Carolina. So for Chris, I'm Wes. Appreciate y'all as always, and we'll see y'all soon.